Welcome back, Sweet Chris here. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at landed costs in NetSuite. So first off, what is landed cost? Landed costs are all of the expenses associated with getting a product to the buyer's doorstep. In this case, we as a company are the buyer and we're procuring inventory or raw materials from a vendor, and all of the shipping, transportation related costs associated with getting that inventory to us are included in the landed costs. So that can be freight charges, shipping insurance, duty, import tax, could be hazmat fees, anything like that, all included into landed costs. And the reason it's so important to calculate is because if we're talking about an item that we sell, let's say a widget, if we sell that item for $6 and we consider the cost of goods sold or the COGS of that widget is $5, the question becomes, are we including the landed costs within that COGS? So if not, then if we're looking at all of the landed costs to, let's say, get this thing shipped to us from China, if we include all these additional costs into that cost of goods sold for the widget, we might actually find that widget costs us $6.10, in which case, if we're selling it for $6, we're not even making a profit on that particular widget. So it's so important to include that landed cost to get an accurate reflection of your cost of goods sold and thus what your margins are. Now, when we talk about methods of tracking landed costs, in NetSuite, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but there's really two basic methods to take. One is an estimated method, and one is called the actuals method. And when any client hears that, they automatically say, well, of course I want to go with the actual method because that's going to be the most accurate. And while that is true, there are a lot of reasons why it's not feasible to take the actuals method. There's two primary reasons, and the first being how close to the item receipt are the bills that you're receiving. And when I say that, what I mean is, if we're ordering this widget, let's say it's from a vendor in China and has to be shipped all the way over to us, when we actually receive that item, at the same time, or if not before, are we receiving the bills from the freight company, the duty fees, the import taxes? Are we receiving all those bills at the same time that we receive that widget? If not, you run into a problem where, let's say we're receiving this item in the month of June. Once June is over, let's say a week goes by and we've now ended that month, we're going to close that month from an accounting standpoint. So if we receive those bills weeks later, then we're not able to accurately and correctly record those landed costs with that item that we received. So to have the actuals method actually work in real life, you need to receive those bills in a timely fashion, either at the same time or ideally before you're receiving that item. A second important factor is how many times are you putting in purchase orders in any given month? If you have a lot of transactions, it might not be feasible to go with the actuals method. It is a little bit time intensive and there's simply manual input that has to be put in to properly record it. The estimated method works a bit more on automatic. It utilizes templates to run it with the minimal amount of human input. So those two factors, when are you getting the bills and how many transactions do you actually have in any given month, really dictate whether you can even go with the actuals method. Of course, if you can utilize it, it is the most accurate. So it's a great method to use if you can get away with it. If not, you're going to have to default to the estimated method. Now, if you're finding this video helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and if you want to see a complete rundown of landed costs, check out my inventory management course. I'm going to be releasing that very soon, and you'll find a link for my courses up above. So if you want to get a really deep dive, not just showing you the actuals method, which I'm going to show you in this video, but also how to utilize the estimated method, as well as a lot of other settings that you need to have enabled for landed costs to work in the first place, then by all means, check out my inventory management course and take advantage of that. But with that said, let's take a look at recording landed costs using the actuals method. All right, so I'm here in my home dashboard, and the first thing I'm going to do is open up a new purchase order. So our scenario is, like I said earlier, we are a company that's going to be procuring. To keep it simple, we're just getting one widget. In this case, it's going to be a torque motor. We're procuring that from a vendor that's, let's say, overseas or in China, and there's going to be a freight charge associated with getting that widget to us. So we're going to record that actual freight cost along with the item receipt, so we have a proper reflection of the landed cost for that widget. So I'm going to go to my purchase order, and we're going to fill in the vendor. We're going to say it's ACOM Business Solutions. So it's just a particular vendor that we're using in this case. It uses that vendor to fill in information like the subsidiary, the location, etc. And we'll come down to the item and we'll select our torque motor. So we've got our torque motor, we'll pick that. And I just want to point out a couple things. If I scroll on the right here, we've got a few different fields like landed cost template. So this is where we would come and we would either fill in or it would automatically fill in the template if we were using the estimated approach. And again, in the course, I walk through in detail how to set up the templates, how those get used, the various settings you need for that, etc. In this particular example, however, we're not using the estimated method, so we can leave that blank. And we're going to come back over to the left here. We've got our torque motor, so we're good to go. We'll hit add, and we're going to save this purchase order. So with the purchase order saved, we can come up here and we can now receive it. And maybe some time has passed, let's say a week or two, for it to ship over, but the widget has now arrived, or again, in this case, it's a torque motor. It's actually arrived to us, and we can create that item receipt record. So we'll click on that, and we'll scroll down here. It fills in the information. And if we come over here, again, we've got no landed costs template selected, so this is being left blank. We also don't need features like landed cost per line selected, because you would utilize that if you were using the template. And we have a landed cost subtab right up here. Now, notice we've got all these different options here. In this case, what we're looking at here, each one of these, landed cost freight, landed cost duties, import fees, each one of these is what's called a cost category. So it's a category of costs or expenses that can be selected to a particular account. And these ones are particularly relevant because they are cost categories that are associated with landed costs. And you're going to see in a second why that's important. But we have them listed out here, and I could come in here and I could say, well, the landed cost for the freight, that was $54. I could just input whatever number I wanted, and that would be a manual approach. But that's not the recommended approach. There's a few different ways you can do this, but I recommend taking a more derivative approach where you're linking it to the actual bill that came in for the freight charge. So we're gonna actually leave this blank for now. And if we come over back to items and expenses, there's one last thing we need to do, which if I go to inventory detail, this particular torque motor is a lot numbered item, which means when I receive it, I do need to say what lot it came from. So it was made in a batch of torque motors, and I'm only receiving one, but I have to say that it came from lot number, let's say it was 432 or 423. So that's recorded. That's not necessarily associated with landed costs. That's just because of this particular item. But with that information in, I can now save this item receipt. So I'm saying that I have in fact received the torque motor, but I have in hand the bill for the freight charge. So immediately after creating this item receipt, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna create a separate bill, a standalone bill. Now, I don't want to create a bill using this button here because this is going to create a bill connected to this item receipt. In other words, a bill from the vendor that we purchased this torque motor from, which was ACOM Business Solutions. So that's what this bill is going to be. It's going to be the $32 or however much this particular torque motor cost. That's not the bill that I want. I got a separate bill from the shipper, and that is what I want to reflect as a separate standalone bill. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to come to the top here and I'm going to select the vendor. Let's say the shipping company we're using is called Frisco. So again, the purchase of the torque motor was done with ACOM. This is a totally different vendor, a shipping company that we are selecting here. So they've sent us their own bill. And I'm also going to put a reference number. So let's select 1234. You're going to see in a second why that's important, but we are going to want to reference back to this bill. So I can come down here So what I'm going to put here is I already have created an item called an other charge item. And if you don't know how to create that kind of item, you can come up to lists, accounting. You can see we have items over here and you can go to create new. You can create all kinds of items: inventory, assembly, non-inventory, service. Other charge is simply a type of item. And this particular other charge item that I created is called a freight charge. And I can pull it up right here: freight landed cost, actual freight. So the whole point of this item is to record freight charges. And in this case, there's only one charge, right? Because it was one shipment. And if I come over on the right here, you can see I've got this category right here, landed cost category. So I mentioned the cost category a little bit earlier. There's a lot of different types of cost categories. You're going to have to create ones, if you're using landed costs and you're tracking them, you're going to have to create ones specifically associated with landed costs. Now, if you remember on the item receipt, if I come back down here to the landed cost tab, you can see I already have these landed costs created because I have one for freight, I have one for duties, and another one for import. So that's already done. Of course, if you were newly implementing, you would have to create those. But for the sake of this bill is specifically for the freight charge. So I want to come here for the cost category and I want to select the one that's relevant, landed cost freight. So with that selected, I can come over here. Now this item automatically has it selected as costing $110. It's probably just the closest thing that could be recorded. But of course, with the bill in hand, I know exactly how much it cost. Maybe it was $97 for this particular shipment. So I could put that amount in, $97. So now I'm reflecting the actual completely accurate cost of the freight. So I'm gonna hit add on that. And with all that information in, and again, remember our reference number is 1234. You can see that up here. I'm going to save this bill. Okay, great. So we have this standalone bill created. Now I can go back to my item receipt and I can come up here to edit it. And now if I come down here to the landed cost subtab, so right here, I could manually put in a number, but I have a standalone bill already. So I'm going to come over here to source and I'm going to select other transaction and I'm going to source 1234. So it's going to pull up the exact bill that I just created. So that transaction, the reference number 1234, you can see it automatically fills in the $97 that I put in for that bill. So it links it straight in. Now I just did that for the freight charge to keep it simple, but if you've got the import and the duty as well, and you've got those bills in hand, you could simply do the exact same thing. You would link it here for duties, link it here for imports. And that way, this item receipt, so let's actually finalize this for a second. Now that I have that sourced in here, I'm going to come down here to save. Great, and it's saved. And where we can see how that's reflected in this transaction is if I come over to GL Impact. So these two items that we have right here, these are the two normal transactions line items for this torque motor that we bought. We can see we have an accrued liability for $25.80. And then we have a debit to inventory for the same $25.80. And in addition, because I've now linked in this freight charge, I have two more line items that are basically recording this accrued expense for the freight charge. So again, we could do the same thing for any landed cost that we have. And as you can see, it's a bit more involved. You do have to create that standalone bill, link it back to the item receipt to make sure that you are properly recording this. But at the end of the day, if you can do it, it is by far the most accurate method to record your landed costs. So that's it for landed costs in NetSuite. If you guys have any requests for future videos, please let me know down in the comments below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.